The smell of her perfume hit me the moment I walked through the front door, something synthetic and too sweet, the kind that clings to everything and never quite lets go. My father was at the kitchen table, his new wife beside him, her hand resting over his like she was staking a claim. Neither of them looked up when I dropped my backpack by the stairs. I had just turned 19 3 days ago. There had been no cake, no candles. My father had texted me a gif of balloons with a yellow smiley face and then, when I didn't respond fast enough, followed it with, "Don't be so sensitive. You're an adult now." That was the version of him I had learned to accept over the last 2 years ever since she arrived. But nothing could have prepared me for what he said that Thursday evening, while she sat beside him wearing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We need to talk about the room situation," he started, not looking at me, rotating his coffee mug in small, slow circles. "Her son is moving in. He needs a real space. You're 19, Emma. You're basically grown." I stood very still. The refrigerator hummed behind me. "My room," I said. It wasn't a question. It came out flat, like pressing a thumb against a bruise to confirm it still hurts. He finally looked up. And the thing that broke something deep and quiet inside me was not anger on his face. It was nothing, just mild discomfort, the expression of a man who has already made his decision and is only now getting around to telling you about it. "We found you a place," my stepmother said brightly. "A studio over on Briar. It's actually really cute. You could make it your own. Your own." Like I was supposed to be grateful for being handed a studio apartment I couldn't afford while my childhood bedroom was handed to a 17-year-old boy I had met exactly 4 times. "I don't have money for rent," I said. My voice was steady. I remember being proud of that. My father shifted in his chair. "You'll figure it out." He said it casually. The same way you'd say it might rain or traffic was bad. Just a shrug, dressed up in words. "You're smart. You always land on your feet." I stood there for another few seconds, waiting for something as softening, a "tell me what you need." Nothing came. My stepmother started talking about the studio's natural lighting. My father refilled his coffee. I walked upstairs, sat on the edge of my bed, and looked around the room I had lived in since I was 4 years old. The pencil marks on the doorframe where my mother used to measure my height every birthday, still there because she had made my father promise never to paint over them. The glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling that had stopped glowing years ago, but stayed because I could never bring myself to pull them down. A framed photo of my mother and me at the beach. I was maybe 6. She was laughing at something off camera, and I had my arms wrapped around her leg like I was afraid she would float away. She had been gone for 11 years. Cancer, quiet and fast, the kind that doesn't announce itself until it's already finished the job. After she died, it had been just my father and me. For a long time, that had been enough. Until it wasn't. I pulled out my phone and stared at the screen for a long time. I had almost no one to call. My best friend was studying abroad. My aunt lived across the country, and we hadn't spoken in months. I scrolled past name after name. And then I stopped at a contact I had saved years ago under a name I rarely let myself think about. Grandma Ruth. She was my father's mother. They had a complicated relationship, distant, careful, full of things they never said out loud. He had taken me to see her exactly twice that I could remember, and both times something about the visit had felt like 2 people circling each other at a careful distance. When I was older, I noticed he never called her. She sent birthday cards every year without fail, always with a handwritten note, always a little longer than felt entirely casual. I had never known what to make of it. I didn't know what made me call her that night instead of anyone else. Maybe it was something about the way she had looked at me on my last visit, when I was 16. Like she was measuring something she wasn't yet ready to say. Like she was waiting. The phone rang twice. "Emma," she said, and her voice was so immediate, so awake despite the hour, that for a second I couldn't speak. "He's making me leave," I said. The tears came then, sudden and embarrassing, and I pressed my hand over my mouth like I could push them back in. "He's giving my room to her son and telling me to figure it out, and I don't know what to do." Silence on the other end. Not the silence of someone who doesn't know what to say. The other kind. The kind that means someone is deciding exactly how much truth to tell you. "Pack a bag," she said quietly. "Enough for a few weeks. I'll have my driver there in the morning." I almost laughed. Your driver? Get some sleep, sweetheart. We'll talk tomorrow. I sat with the phone in my hand for a long time after she hung up. I had not known she had a driver. I had not known very much about her at all, and I was beginning to understand that this was not an accident. Her driver arrived at 7:15 the next morning. A man in a dark jacket who introduced himself as Thomas and carried my bag to a black car that was understated in the particular way. Expensive things often are no logos, no flash, just a quiet certainty about itself. He didn't say much, and I was grateful for that. I watched my street disappear in the rearview mirror and tried to remember the last time someone had come to get me without being asked twice. My grandmother's house was about 40 minutes outside the city, set back from the road behind iron gates and old oak trees. Not a mansion, something more serious than that. The kind of home built by someone who had no interest in impressing anyone, only in permanence. Stone walls, a wide front porch, climbing roses that had clearly been growing for decades. Thomas opened my door, and she was already standing on the porch steps, arms crossed against the morning chill, watching me with those sharp, careful eyes. She looked older than I remembered, but also somehow more solid, more certain. You look exhausted, she said by way of greeting, and something about the bluntness of it made me want to cry all over again. I'm okay, I said automatically. She gave me a look that suggested she did not find this credible. Come inside. I made coffee. The inside of the house smelled like cedar and old books and something faintly floral that I couldn't name but immediately wanted to bottle. She led me into a sitting room and set a mug in front of me without asking how I took it she had remembered from the last visit. Black with half a teaspoon of sugar, and then she sat across from me and looked at me for a moment. The way a doctor looks at an X-ray. Tell me everything, she said. So I did. The 2 years of small exclusions building into something larger. The way my father gradually replaced the vocabulary of our home, our habits, our traditions with hers. How the pencil marks on the doorframe had finally been painted over last spring, and when I brought it up, my father said I was being dramatic. How I had started eating dinner in my room most nights because the table no longer felt like mine. And finally, Thursday evening. You'll figure it out. The studio I couldn't afford. The casual certainty that I would simply disappear and make room. My grandmother listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, hands wrapped around her mug. Your father has always been very good at rewriting history, she said carefully. He did it with your mother too, near the end. It is one of the things I have never forgiven him for, and I suspect never will. I looked up. What do you mean? She set down her mug. Your mother and I were close. Closer than your father ever knew or would have liked. She made me promise to look after you if anything happened to her. And she put something in writing to make sure I could keep that promise even if your father tried to make it difficult. The room was very quiet. Somewhere outside a bird was calling. There is a trust fund, my grandmother said. Your mother set it up before she died. A significant one. It was to transfer to you at 21 or earlier under certain circumstances. Your father was made administrator, which was a mistake, and one I should have fought harder at the time. Her voice tightened on that last sentence, the only sign of emotion she allowed herself. For the last decade, he has been managing those assets, and over the last 2 years, since she moved in, certain funds have been redirected in ways that are not entirely legal. The world seemed to tilt slightly. He was stealing from my trust. Using it to fund a lifestyle he could not otherwise afford. The house renovations last year. Her car. A vacation to Tuscany. She said it evenly, but her eyes were like flint. I've had a lawyer watching the account for some time. I was waiting for the right moment, waiting until you were old enough and until I had sufficient documentation. She paused. I did not anticipate him doing something this reckless this quickly. I thought about the kitchen table. The casual shrug. You'll figure it out. What happens now? I asked. And my voice came out smaller than I wanted it to. My grandmother reached across and took my hand. Her grip was firm and dry and completely steady. Now, she said, we make it right. On your terms. The next few days passed in a kind of suspended quiet that I didn't entirely trust, the way a bruise doesn't hurt until the next morning. My grandmother gave me a room on the second floor with windows that looked out over the garden. It was a real room, heavy curtains, books on the shelves, a writing desk that had probably belonged to someone significant a long time ago. I sat in it the first evening and tried to remember the last time a space had felt like it was genuinely for me. Her lawyers arrived on Monday. Two of them, serious and efficient in the way people are when they have long ago stopped needing to perform competence. They sat with me at the dining table for 2 hours, explaining in careful language what had happened and what could be done about it. The trust had been established in my mother's name with my grandmother as backup trustee. The redirection of funds was documented and provable. My father had apparently believed that because he controlled the account, he also controlled the visibility of it. He had been wrong about that. How long until he knows? I asked. The older lawyer looked at me over her glasses. He'll receive formal notice from our firm by end of week. We'll be filing simultaneously to have trusteeship transferred to your grandmother and to freeze any remaining joint assets until an audit can be completed. I thought about his face. The careful absence of expression on Thursday evening. You're basically grown. What about her? I asked. His wife. Does she know? The lawyers exchanged a glance that told me they had already considered this. Based on the financial records, she is a beneficiary of certain expenditures. Whether she knew the source of those funds is something we will examine closely. I nodded slowly. I thought about her bright voice talking about natural lighting in a studio apartment she had no intention of paying for herself. On Friday evening, my grandmother called me to the sitting room with the quiet certainty of someone delivering news they have been holding carefully. She handed me her phone without a word. There were missed calls from my father. 12 of them, spanning about 4 hours. The last voicemail was still playing as she handed it to me, and even through the small speaker, I could hear the shape of panic underneath his careful words. This is clearly a misunderstanding. Emma, call me back. There are things you don't know about the financial history, things that need context. Please, we can talk about this. I set the phone down on the side table. Do you want to call him back? My grandmother asked. Not pushing, just asking. I thought about it for a real moment, because I owed it to myself to actually think rather than just react. I thought about the kitchen table and the coffee mug rotating in slow circles. I thought about the studio apartment with its great natural lighting. I thought about the Tuscany vacation I had not been invited on. I thought about the pencil marks on the doorframe that no longer existed. Not yet, I said. She nodded. No commentary. No good for you, or that's the right choice. Just a nod. Like she trusted me to manage my own story. He called my cell phone the next morning. I was in the garden with a cup of tea when it buzzed, and I stood there watching his name pulse on the screen until it stopped. Then I put the phone back in my pocket and finished my tea. He called again that afternoon. This time I picked up. There was a fraction of a second where I heard the relief in his exhale, the mistake of a man who had convinced himself that silence meant leverage. Emma, thank God. I've been trying to reach you. I know, I said. Where are you? Are you with her? Is she filling your head with Emma? There is a great deal of context you don't have here. The trust fund, the finances. There were cash flow issues after your mother died. I had to make decisions, and I always intended to. You always intended to what? I asked. Silence. Replace it? Before I turned 21? Was that the plan? My voice was even. I was proud of that the way you are proud of something you practiced, without knowing you were practicing it. You were going to put it back before I knew it was gone? It's more complicated than that. His voice had shifted, the relief gone. Something harder and more familiar moving in underneath. You're a child. You don't understand financial management. I'm 19, I said. You told me 3 days ago I was basically grown. You made me leave my house. I didn't make you. You told me to figure it out. I let that sit in the air between us for a moment. I figured it out. A long silence. When he spoke again. His voice had changed again, this time to something quieter and more careful, the register of a man recalculating. Emma, I know things have been difficult since your mother. And maybe the way I handled the room situation was not ideal. But we can work through this. Come home. We'll talk, all of us together, and… Is she still there? I asked. A pause. She lives there. Then there's nothing to come home to, I said. That stopped being my home a long time ago. This is what she does, he said, and now his voice had a thin, desperate edge. Your grandmother, she poisons people against me. She always has. Ever since I was a kid, she's been controlling and manipulative, and she has money, so everyone treats her like she's. Goodbye, I said. I ended the call and stood in the garden for a long time, listening to the sound of the wind in the oak trees. I waited to feel guilty. I waited for the particular hollowness that follows a confrontation with someone you still, somewhere underneath everything, wanted to love you back differently. It came. I let it come. But underneath it, quieter and more durable, was something that felt surprisingly like solid ground. My grandmother was in the kitchen when I came inside, reading something at the table with her glasses low on her nose. She looked up. He called you, she said. It was not a question. I answered this time. She watched me for a moment. How are you feeling? I sat down across from her. Like I have a lot of questions. She closed her book. Ask them. Did she know? I said. His wife. Did she know about the trust fund? My grandmother considered this carefully, the way she considered everything, not stalling, just refusing to be imprecise. My lawyers believed she was aware the money was coming from somewhere outside his declared income. Whether she asked questions or chose not to is a distinction the legal process will likely clarify. A pause. People who benefit from not asking questions rarely ask them. So when the money stops, I said slowly. My grandmother raised an eyebrow slightly, the closest she came to a smile. People like that tend to reassess their arrangements. It took 3 weeks. I know because I was keeping track without quite meaning to. 3 weeks after the lawyers filed, my grandmother mentioned quietly over dinner that my father's wife had apparently moved out of the house and was staying with her sister. She said it the way you'd mention a weather update, informational. No commentary. I put down my fork. Her son too? Her son too. I sat with that for a moment, tried to find satisfaction in it, and found something more complicated instead. Not quite relief. Not quite sadness. Something in between that I didn't have a clean word for. She only stayed for the money, I said. Yes, my grandmother said simply. He knew that, didn't he? On some level. She was quiet for a moment. Your father has always been very good at wanting things to be true. It is not the same as knowing them. I thought about that for a long time afterward. The difference between wanting something to be true and knowing it. How much damage gets done in that gap, and how long it takes to cross back over. The audit took 2 months to complete. I won't detail every document and disclosure and carefully worded legal letter, because the truth is that process happened mostly without me, my grandmother, and her lawyers navigating a system I was still learning to trust. What I knew, each step of the way, was this. The trust was real. My mother had built it for me and made it as hard as she could for anyone to destroy. The money that had been redirected was being recovered. By the time the audit closed, trusteeship had transferred permanently to my grandmother with a provision that transferred directly to me at 21. My father called twice more during those 2 months. I let both calls go to voicemail. The first was defensive. The second was quieter. And something in the quieter one cost me more to listen to, not because it was convincing, but because underneath the self-justification there was something that sounded like a man realizing he was alone. I held the phone for a long time after that voicemail ended. Then I set it down and went to find my grandmother. She was in her garden, doing something precise and unhurried among the rose beds. She looked up when she heard me on the gravel. He left a message, I said. She waited. He sounds, I paused. I don't know, like he knows it's over. My grandmother pulled off one of her gardening gloves, slowly and deliberately. Do you want to respond? The question sat in the afternoon air. I thought about the pencil marks. I thought about the birthday gift with the yellow, smiley face. I thought about standing in my kitchen waiting for one human moment from a man I had spent my entire childhood trying to be enough for. Not right now, I said. Maybe someday. But not right now. She nodded. And then she put her glove back on and returned to the roses with the quiet certainty of someone who knew when to let things be. I enrolled in classes that fall at a university 40 minutes from my grandmother's house. I had deferred enrollment the previous year because money had felt impossible and my father had made vague discouraging noises whenever I brought up tuition. Now the tuition was covered. My grandmother had also quietly set aside an amount for living expenses that meant I could buy groceries without doing the mental math 4 times at the checkout. The first day I walked into a classroom as someone who was supposed to be there, not surviving on a margin, not calculating whether I could stay. I sat down in my seat and stared at the whiteboard for a moment before the professor arrived. And I thought about my mother's handwriting in my birthday cards every year until the year there were no more birthday cards. She had always signed them the same way. "You were made for more than this. I love you forever." I had never been entirely sure what the first sentence meant when I was small. I was beginning to understand it now. There are things I want to tell you if you are somewhere in the middle of a story like mine. Not at the end, not yet, but in that part where it is still dark and you cannot entirely see the shape of what is coming. The person who abandons you is not a comment on your worth. I know that is easy to say and nearly impossible to feel, especially when the person doing the abandoning is someone who is supposed to know you best. The gap between what you were told you were worth and what you actually are, that gap is theirs, not yours. They made it. They live in it. You don't have to. The people who step into the gap, the ones who show up when you call, who hand you a cup of coffee the way you take it because they were paying attention, who sit across from you and say, "Ask your questions," and mean it, they are telling you something true about yourself. Something your father or your mother or whoever left you couldn't see. The seeing was never the issue. The wanting to see was. I saw my grandmother at breakfast this morning. She was reading the news with her glasses on the end of her nose, and she pushed a plate of toast toward me without looking up, and there was something in that small, unconscious gesture. "I exist to you. You thought of me. I was in your peripheral vision, even when you weren't looking directly at me," that I held on to for a quiet moment before I sat down. She looked up over her glasses. "Sleep well?" "Better than I have in years," I told her. She gave me that almost smile. "Good," she said. "You have class at 9. I ate my toast. Outside the window, the oak trees were doing their slow October thing, turning gold at the edges. The roses were still there, trimmed back for the season but persistent, because my grandmother plants things that are meant to come back. I am not the girl who was told to figure it out and handed a studio apartment I couldn't afford. I am the woman who called the one person who is actually paying attention, who asked her questions, who stayed, who built something out of what was left over and found out it was enough to start from. My father has not called in 6 weeks. I don't know where his wife is. I don't know if he is sitting somewhere running the same calculations over and over, trying to find where the math went wrong. Maybe someday we will be in the same room again, and there will be something to say to each other that is worth saying. Maybe not. What I know is this. The woman who built my trust fund knew exactly what she was doing. She knew she might not be there to protect me herself, so she built the protection into the structure of things, into legal language and signed documents, and a grandmother I barely knew who had promised to watch over me and kept that promise for 11 years, waiting for the moment it was needed. She made sure I would be held even when she couldn't hold me. I think about her when the oak trees do their October thing. I think about her when I get a coffee the way I take it without having to ask. I think about her in the morning when I sit at a desk in a room that is actually mine, in a house where I am not background noise, not baggage. Someone couldn't figure out how to check, not a problem to be solved. I think about her and I think, I see what you did. I see who you built me toward. I'm on my way there. And then I pick up my bag and go to class.